Please welcome to the stage the members of our next panel discussion. Linguist Dr. Hrach Martirosyan, journalist Lika Zakaryan, and director of the USC Institute of Armenian Studies, Dr. Shushan Karapetian.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this very important panel on language as witness. It is a great honor for me to have these very special guests with us who can illuminate the monumental role of language in both cementing the Armenian presence in Artsakh, but also documenting the lives, stories, and experiences of the Artsakh population's dispossession. We are specifically going to talk about the Artsakh dialects of the Armenian language. And for any of you sitting in this audience, if you think you are not a speaker of a dialect, you are mistaken. We are all speakers of dialects. Even those of us who speak the Yerevan dialect, we are speakers of a dialect. And dialects are our collective heritage. They are our mother tongues. They are our first associations, first expressions, first discoveries of our human experience. I want to turn first to Lika Zakaryan. Many of you may know her as the author of 44 Days, Diary from an Invisible War. It was a diary she wrote from a bunker during the 2020 war, which then turned into a book and then turned into the movie Invisible Republic. Lika, as a native of Artsakh, I want to ask you a question that I pose to my podcast guests all the time, which is, tell me the story of your life through your languages. What does it mean to be born in Artsakh in terms of your linguistic repertoire?
Hi, thank you for having us here. And it's a very complicated question and very interesting. When I count on my mind, I count on Artsakh dialect. I was born in Stepanakert, so I think it's right to say Artsakh dialects, right? I was born in Stepanakert, so there is Stepanakert dialect, but I was born in a multi-dialect family. My grandfather is from Mardakert, my grandmother is from Martuni, and the other grandmother and grandfather are from Askeran regions, which are all regions of Artsakh. And then it comes Russian as, let's say, second mother tongue because of the television and media presence, and later English, and my left languages took me to Spanish and German and Turkish later. So it's very, very long and complicated issue.
And I'm happy you underscored the plural. It wasn't accidental or a slip of the tongue that I keep saying Artsakh dialects and not Artsakh dialect. Just with Lika's example, we realized she was born into a family where 3 different variants of the Artsakh dialect were used. Obviously, I'm sure you were taught standard Eastern Armenian at school, Russian, which has such a major presence, and all of these languages and language varieties are in a kind of fluid harmony with one another. As someone from Artsakh, Lika was my most recent guest on a podcast I host on language called Language Therapy with Dr. K. And one of the most important moments in our discussion was when I asked you, what does it feel like to navigate life in Armenia as a speaker and a carrier of the Artsakh dialects? What does it mean in the day-to-day decisions of which language variety you highlight, which one you shy away from? What does it mean in terms of what kind of decisions are families making about language policy and what language they wish to transmit? Which language do they wish to kind of put in the shadows? I wonder if you could share a little bit about what it feels like to navigate life in Armenia.
Yes, in the taking into consideration the recent developments of Artsakh, exodus and moving, let's say, to Armenia, there is a big challenge of keeping the identity. And at the moment, for me at least, dialect is probably the most important part of the identity, and it is for other people as well. many people that I know. And the thing is that in Armenia, it depends a lot on the locals. We want to talk about it or no, there is a certain perception by the locals towards Artsakhtsis and towards the Artsakh dialect. That's why there are people who shy to speak Artsakh dialect outside. Like I know a couple, they had a kid and they speak to their child only in Eastern Armenian, so she doesn't get bullied in the school, as they say. And I remember there was a comment, bullied, under that post on Instagram. Yes, we want to accept it or not, there is a certain issue. But at the same time, there is of course, a positive reaction to it as well. There are people that might hear you speaking Artsakh dialect and just look at you empathically and approach you or just smile to you and support you. So it's very complicated and it depends a lot. And at the same time, there are people who, in contrast, decide not to change their natural behavior, and they speak Artsakh dialect everywhere outside and in transport and everywhere. I myself speak Artsakh dialect wherever I can, but of course, like in Yerevan, I communicate with the locals in the language they understand, they know. So, yes.
What are perceptions of mutual intelligibility? Because perceptions shape people's behaviors. What is the kind of general, wider perception of how mutually intelligible the Artsakh dialects are for Yerevan or larger Armenian natives, and also about the purity or impurity or corrupted nature, and these, I hope you can tell from my body language, I'm doing air quotes, of particular dialects?
I don't think all the, like, let's say Yerevan Armenians, I don't think they fully understand dialect. And even if I speak dialect very quickly, even dialect speakers may not understand me. That's why there is a certain issue with that, of course. And the arguments that I heard from Armenians about Artsakh dialect and their negative reaction to it is that it's not pure. It consists of Turkish words, and when we speak especially about Stepanakert and Hadru, that it consists a lot of Russian words, but mostly it's about Turkish, like Turkish, sometimes Persian, and and that makes Artsakh people feel very uncomfortable. These all thoughts.
I want to turn now to Dr. Hrach Martirosyan, and before I allow him to speak, I want to introduce him in a way that I hope will resonate with you all. You know, in the world of therapy or psychologist, every therapist needs their therapist. In the world of sociolinguists, as a sociolinguist, I need my linguist, and my linguist is Dr. Martirosyan. So whenever I need backup, or I need inspiration, or I need validation, or I need someone to say what I've been dying to say, but I can't find the right words, I call on Dr. Martirosyan, and this is precisely that moment. Dr. Martirosyan, can you first explain to us the place or role of the Artsakh dialects in the larger picture of the Armenian language family?
Thanks a lot for your wonderful words, and also having me in this amazing, very important event. Artsakh dialect, as you mentioned earlier, Artsakh dialects, not one single dialect, but it's a group of dialects or sub-dialects. They belong to the eastern grouping of Armenian dialects. Of course, there are many, many tens of Armenian dialects, more than 50 or 60. And even more sub-dialects, of course. And Artsakh dialects belong to the eastern group, and they are very close to Araratian, Lori, and much closer to Syunik. Of course, Artsakh and Syunik actually form one single unit. Of course, there are boundaries between the sub-dialects, etc., but they are very close to each other, and they are opposed to Western dialects. But in between, we have one Vaspurakan, which is much closer to Artsakh group than to Mush, Sasun, and the others.
I want to interrupt just to make one thing clear, because often in conversation we say Artsakh dialects versus Eastern Armenian. Artsakh dialects are Eastern Armenian.
Of course, yes, it belongs to,
So,
as Persian Armenian dialects too, so they also belong to the Eastern group.
Exactly. And if maybe we could highlight what is so distinctive about the Artsakh dialects, what are certain features?
For instance, although, as I said, Artsakh dialects are very close to Araratian and Lori, there are many distinctive features which makes them apart, like so-called Ajaram's law. So if the word starts with voiced consonant, voice stop, that is b, g, or d, then the following vowel becomes palatalized. So garun becomes garun, and then we have shift to p-k-t, then karun. And many people consider this as a corruption or pollution, which is ridiculous, of course. Every language, every variety of any language or any dialect has its way of development, and it can differ from the other ones. So it's not good, not bad. So it's just the essence of language. Language always changes, and there is no single language or dialect which remains intact during centuries, not even during 1 week. So language develops every minute, every hour, right?
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I just want to make a quick comment about languages being in constant change. When I was a graduate student, I had the fortune of having Olga Kagan as one of my advisors, and she was a very famous linguist and a scholar of Russian. And my office was right across the hall from hers, and I had heard from colleagues that she had just published her newest textbook. She was very well known for publishing Russian textbooks, so I mustered up the courage, walked into her office, and said, "Dr. Kagan, congratulations on the publication of your textbook." And she said, "It's already outdated. By the time I wrote the textbook, by the time it went through copy edit, and by the time it's published, the language has changed."
Yes, of course. And that's why we also said that dialects are the living form of the language, because unlike the official standard language, dialect or colloquial language always changes, and it always is updated, so it's always breathing. So then the standard language, literary language, should follow dialects and colloquial language rather than the opposite direction, right?
Dr. Martirosyan, can you share a little bit of both the innovations of the Artsakh dialects and the archaisms? So much of the arguments about language purism, language corruption, are based on the following logic, that there was once this pure, perfect Armenian called classical or ancient Armenian. There was once this group of pure, perfect Armenians who spoke this pure, perfect classical Armenian, and then there came the generations after who polluted it. And we are, of course, the polluters. The corruptors. Could you set the record straight with the example of both the innovations and the archaisms in the Artsakh dialects?
Of course, this is a very important issue, and we can pinpoint to many examples which at the same time represent in one and the same word both innovations and preservation or archaism. Just to take a very simple example, the word for lamb, garn, in different dialects, it has different consonant development, like in Tigranakert, it is kar, in Sasun, it is kar, in Ararat, Lori, it remains intact, so gar. Van Vaspurakan has kar, and Artsakh has karne. And what is wonderful that you see the classical form is garn, and
the form in the classical pure perfect Armenian is garn with the n. We've dropped it in most of the other dialects.
But only Artsakh, Syunik, and Agulis, these dialects preserve this n intact. So kar becomes karna. So in the same form, we have both development, that is sound law of Acharyan, and consonant shift. But at the same time, it remains intact as far as the final n is concerned. So it's archaic too. And we actually have many archaisms in this eastern peripheral dialectal area.
Lika, I want to turn back to you and ask, you obviously have perfect command of standard literary Eastern Armenian. So when you speak in standard literary Eastern Armenian, how can people discern that you are a speaker of the Artsakh dialect?
Yes, I think it's mostly because of the music of the language, let's say the pronunciation. I say the same word that Yerevanti says, but it just sounds differently. It's probably because of the music. It sounds really different.
Dr. Martirosyan, can you shed some light on what sounds different? What is it about the intonation or the particular stress in the Artsakh dialects that gives away this distinction?
Yes, that's one of the most remarkable features, accentuation, and these Artsakh and neighborhood dialectal regions. We have so-called penultimate accentuation. That is, accent falls not on the final syllable, as in almost the whole Armenian world, but on the second from the last syllable. And actually this is amazing because in pre-classical period, the same was also with our ancient Armenian form. So several centuries before Mr. Martot's era, Armenian had the same kind of penultimate accentuation. So accent was on the second from the last syllable. So Artsakh and neighboring areas return to justice. I mean, so they return to pre-classical, so more than Voskegenic, so even more, so some diamond era. So although it was non-literary period, but actually, so this is an amazing example how subtle can be changes and how dangerous is to give estimation to any dialect, so which one is more Hayetsi, more Armenianness, representing Armenianness, or which one not. So this is a ridiculous issue, of course. So every dialect has its own way, and each of them represents their own development of the common ancient Armenian.
Lika, since you've been in Armenia, you've taken up a new mission with a new project, which is this wonderful podcast called Multimedia through CivilNet. For those of you who may not know what that means, I learned from Lika that Multimedia in the Artsakh dialects means spider web. And what's so amazing about this podcast that Lika hosts is that it is entirely conducted, produced, disseminated in the Artsakh dialects. Could you please share your vision and your goals with this podcast?
It was last year when, after the Exodus, my parents were guided to move to Gyumri in corridor, the first stop after the Artsakh in Armenia. The government sent them to Gyumri. And I was thinking to myself that in some years they might use some Gyumri dialect words in their speech, which is beautiful indeed, as I like to say, but fortunately is not under the risk of extinction. And I thought that it's going to change anyways, but I wanted to document it the way that it was at the moment of the Exodus, like till it didn't change. First reason was to document the human stories and document it in dialects exactly. Second reason was to create a content because as I remember myself learning Russian, it was all because of the content, it was all because of the television, and especially if we want the kids learn and know the dialect, we have to provide them the content. Of course, the podcast isn't enough for kids. We have to come up with new ideas, and I already have some. But we have to give people, and both Artsakhis and the locals, local Armenians, when they hear it, they get used to it more, and they stop surprising in the street when they hear it. And the third reason, which is a little bit ambitious, to preserve. I believe here I want to mention that my podcast isn't unique. There are other podcasts and projects as well by Artsakh people. There is podcast, there is Ecos podcast, there is Tana Nigeran podcast. Other Artsakh young people are also concerned about this issue, which is wonderful. And I believe that this can be a drop in the ocean, what we do. It's not enough, but it can be at least something.
Well, all major projects start as drops in the ocean, but I want to reflect on the importance of content and the importance of building familiarity and of providing exposure, because so many of the stereotypes and negative perceptions that are formed out of ignorance, are formed out of lack of knowledge. And when you provide people content, when you provide people human stories, human experiences they can relate to, that's when those stereotypes are shattered. I'm really curious about, I'm going to tell the story and then get to my question. How many of you know the song Alo Alo by any chance? If you all remember, it was the first song that made it to the larger popular consciousness in the Armenian world in the Artsakh dialect. And it was a beautiful song, a young man who had had a fight with his girlfriend saying, "Alo, alo, I keep calling you, you're not answering my call. Did you find someone better than me?" It was gorgeous. And since that song came out, I don't know, maybe a decade ago, I've played it every quarter, every semester, in every class I've taught. And then when I put it on for my class, first we have to determine what language is it in. Then we have to determine what the song is about, and so on and so on. And then I show them an interview with the singer, Artyom Walter, where someone asks, why did you produce this song in the Artsakh dialect? It would limit the chances of this song becoming widely popular. And he said, it was a love song. How could I write it in any other language? The language of my heart is in dialect. So my question for you is, when you invite people to your podcast, do they first start in standard Armenian and then you have to kind of break them down and get them honest to then transition to dialect? What are those dynamics?
Yes, it depends, but it's usually that way, because they see the camera, they are dressed formal, and they start. I ask the question in dialect, and they start replying in Eastern Armenian. I say, no, stop, please. It's not a live. We can disrupt you, please. Do you remember why we gathered here? And then they start. But it takes time till you really, unpack them from all the layers, and then once they start, they can go like crazy. But only in dialect you can get all those emotions and all the ways they formulate the way the things they want to say. It's the dialect. As I thought, like when you count, in which language do you count, right? And I think it's very similar to that.
It's interesting because, Lika, what you're doing with your podcast, you are trying to document and preserve a contemporary way of life so that someone down the road will have access to this. Dr. Martirosyan, I want to turn to you because you have for years been working on a manuscript about the role of the Artsakh dialects and what they have to tell us about the Armenian presence. And I know I'm biased because I'm a sociolinguist and I'm in linguistics, and it's very intentional that we have this particular panel because often, I don't know why, we leave language out of the story when language contains the entire story. And I want to ask if you could shed some light on how what linguistics as a science has to contribute to conversations about the historic and continuous Armenian presence in Artsakh.
Yes, of course, linguistics plays a crucial role, I would say, because it shows periodically the presence in all the periods of the Armenian vernacular and also the local development of the local dialectal forms. Of course, we know that all the types of sources are represented in Artsakh, so it's ridiculous to to argue against the Armenian presence during more than 2 millennia, right? So we have historical documents, not only from Armenian side, but also ancient Greek, Latin, and other sources, like, for example, famous historian, geographer Strabo, in his famous Geographia, he talks about Shakashen, which is a district even more easterly located than Artsakh, in Utik, right? And this Shakashen he calls Armenian land. And so we have thousands of inscriptions, khachkars with inscriptions, churches, every type of sources, of course. And above all, we have linguistic material. From one side, we have, for example, place names, which directly show the Armenian presence on the certain localization. And then we have another type of evidence, which is really very, very important because it shows development of the certain linguistic features during centuries, according to the local dialectal forms. Like we all know about Tigranakert. Of course, there are different Tigranakerts. One of the most famous is in close to Amid, Diyarbakir, etc. And this was the capital, right? But next to this, there are also other Tigranakerts, and one of them being in Artsakh. And you know about successful excavations during the last 2 decades. And this Tigranakert is, of course, a purely Armenian creation compound, Tigranakert, built by Tigran the Great. And what is also interesting, that it is attested in works of historians like Moses Karankatvatsi and Sebeos, and in many manuscripts it appears in the form Tekranakert or Tekrakert. So this is typically Artsakh dialectal development. So it's not from 19th or 20th century, but much before. So it's one of the important forms of this place name, and it betrays Artsakh local dialectal development. So the loss of Pretonic E, not Tigranakert, but Tekranakert, and there is a version Tekrakert, G, K, again shift, and R after the K, etc. So there are hundreds of such examples, and this is just one of them.
Because we're short on time, I won't have Dr. Martirosyan give more examples, but any of you who are interested, if you visit his academia.edu page, he has wonderful articles giving hundreds of examples of place names, and not only place names, but words of particular cultural and social artifacts that also attest and are witness to the Armenian presence. I want to conclude with a quick question for the both of you. Given how special dialects are in being so nuanced and so sophisticated and so expressive, is there a particular word, expression, proverb in the Artsakh dialects that you admire or cannot live without, or no translation will do?
There is a wonderful saying in Artsakh dialect. So if we translate to English, it will sound like this: every person has a star in the sky and a tree in the forest. The first part is famous from the different regions, but the second makes the story complete because it shows microcosm, right? So every person is representative of the cosmos, but in a micro way, and vertically 3 worlds. So roots of the tree, and then star. So every person has this vertical, all the 3 layers of the cosmic structure, and this is really amazing. So maybe we could ask Lika to pronounce it in the Artsakh dialect.
To translate.
To translate back to the original.
I will translate, and I won't bring my own example because they are not translatable to English. It's like Ammen Mart yerginkumes min astagone zamakumnel min tsar. In Artsakh dialect, it sounds like that.
And very resonant of the beautiful performance lecture we had on the tangerine tree. I want to thank you both so much for having this conversation with me, and I want to end this panel sharing that while Hrach is working on the historical and continuous presence of Armenians and Armenian in Artsakh, and Lika is busy documenting the way of life of those displaced in Armenia, we in the diaspora are also constantly navigating our relationship with our language. The most recent essay I published is called Performing Diasporic Resistance, Reclaiming the Heritage Language. And I was examining the unprecedented mobilization of Armenian youth during and after the 2020 war. And in a mode of helplessness and paralysis, the only thing we could do in the diaspora was claim our language. And I started that essay with a quote from none other than Viet Thanh Nguyen, who you just had the pleasure of seeing. And I'd just like to read the first two lines. All wars are fought twice. The first time on the battlefield, the second time in memory. I would argue that in both cases, but especially the latter, the theater of war is language. Through language, we frame the narratives of our experiences and transmit those narratives for the historical record as individuals and collectives. Thank you very much.